Unaware, my husband didn't know I just inherited $10 billion. He kicked me out while pregnant with our 3 kids into the street, but he forgot whose name was actually on the deed. He didn't just throw her out, he humiliated her while he did it. It happened at night, while she was pregnant, with one child clinging to her leg and the other 2 crying behind her, right on the front porch of the house she believed was her home. Daniel Carter stood in the doorway, his face cold, his voice sharp with impatience. His mother stood beside him, arms crossed. Another woman stood just behind his shoulder, watching quietly. And in front of them all, he pointed toward the street and said, "You don't own anything here. You never did. Take your kids and go." Emily Carter tried to speak, but he cut her off. "You've lived off me long enough," he added. "You're not even useful anymore. Just look at you." His mother nodded in agreement. The other woman didn't say a word she didn't need to. Her smile said everything. The lock clicked before Emily could answer. For a moment the world felt unreal. Her body ached. Her stomach was heavy with the baby she was carrying. Her purse was light because he controlled every card and every password. To them, she was nothing more than a dependent wife, quiet, unemployed, replaceable. A woman who managed children and schedules but had no power, no money, no voice. That's what they believed. What they didn't know was this. The woman standing on the porch had already inherited a fortune so large, it was managed through sealed trusts and silent lawyers. Just days earlier, the last paperwork from her late father's estate had been finalized on paper, confirming assets worth over $10 billion and confirming, in writing, that the very house Daniel was locking behind her was separate property held for Emily alone. The deed wasn't in his name. It never had been. Emily didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't tell them the truth. Because the night her husband chose to humiliate her at her weakest moment was the night he unknowingly evicted himself. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when a man throws away a woman he never truly understood while standing inside a house the law says belongs to her. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like letting Emily's quiet strength go unseen the way they ignored her that night. When you click subscribe, you stand with every woman who was underestimated, humiliated, and still rose. And tell me where you're watching from. See you in the story. The sound that woke Emily Carter wasn't gentle. It was sharp. Daniel's phone buzzing on the nightstand, vibrating hard enough to rattle the wood. Emily's eyes snapped open before the alarm ever rang. Her hand went to her stomach on instinct, feeling the slow, heavy movement of the baby inside her. She was 32, heavily pregnant, and already calculating the day ahead before her feet touched the floor. Daniel Carter, her husband of 9 years, reached for the phone without looking at her. He was 36, well-dressed even at home, always halfway somewhere else. He frowned at the screen and muttered, "I'm late," as if the house itself had failed him. Emily sat up carefully. "Your meeting was moved to 10, she said softly. "I updated your calendar last night after your assistant called." Daniel paused, irritated. "You're wrong," he said, not looking back. "You always think you know my schedule better than I do." Emily didn't argue. She rarely did anymore. Once before the kids, she'd been the one chasing deadlines. She'd started law school, even made it halfway through before dropping out when her mother got sick and then when the first baby came. The plan had always been that she'd go back. Life had other ideas. She swung her legs over the bed and stood slowly, steadying herself against the dresser. The children would be up soon. Breakfast needed to be ready. Medication times were written in blue marker on the fridge. Permission slips were already signed. The house ran on Emily's quiet systems, color-coded charts, timers, lists taped inside cabinet doors. She kept everything smooth so no one else had to think. The children, 3 of them, all under 8, ate breakfast at the table while Emily moved between them, tying shoes, brushing hair, wiping faces. They leaned into her without asking. She knew every small sound that meant hunger, fear, or a coming meltdown. Daniel walked past them, adjusting his cufflinks. "You're spoiling them," he said flatly. "They need to toughen up." "They're children," Emily replied, still calm. Daniel snorted. "That's your excuse for everything." It wasn't the first time he spoke that way. Lately his words landed like small cuts, never enough to draw blood, always enough to sting. He glanced at her stomach and added, "And maybe if you hadn't let yourself go, things wouldn't feel so off." Emily felt the words settle in her chest. She said nothing. Silence had become a skill. After Daniel left, the house exhaled. The children went to school. The toddler napped. Emily walked to the refrigerator and checked the medical chart she'd made for herself: appointments, blood pressure notes, warning signs to watch for. She had written them neatly, carefully. She trusted paper more than memory. That trust came from long before Daniel. Years ago, before marriage, before children, Emily had stood in a lawyer's office across from her father. He was a quiet man with tired eyes, already worn down by illness and regret. He and Emily's mother had separated early, and distance had turned into silence. When he reached out again, it wasn't for forgiveness, it was for preparation. He told her about the estate, the companies, the properties held under a private family trust. Emily barely listened to the numbers. She was still hurt, still guarded. "I don't want this," she had said then. Her father shook his head. "You don't have to want it," he replied. "You just have to protect yourself." He slid documents across the table. Deeds, trust agreements, contingency clauses. One of them was a short prenuptial addendum, already drafted for any future spouse, stating that property bought with trust funds, including any primary residence, would remain Emily's separate property. Emily signed where she was told, her hands steady but her heart far away. Years later, when she and Daniel got serious, her father's lawyers had him sign that same addendum as part of their prenup package. He joked about all the legal nonsense and signed without really reading it, more eager to set a wedding date than to study clauses. "Never announce strength," her father said quietly. "Let paperwork speak when voices fail." He passed away not long after. The trust lawyers handled the rest. Emily never reopened the files. She stored them, untouched, believing that love and effort mattered more than money ever could. Back in the present, Emily walked to the hallway closet and reached behind the winter coats. Her fingers brushed the small, fireproof document pouch. It was still there. It always was. Inside lay the trust papers, the old prenup her father had insisted on, and the title documents to their house put in her name when they bought it, because the down payment had come from a gift from her father's estate. Daniel had joked at the time that it was just a formality. "On paper it's yours, but we know who really pays the bills," he'd said, half laughing. She'd smiled, not correcting him. She didn't open the pouch now. She never did. Daniel once laughed when he saw her put it away. "You and your little papers," he said, "like they matter." At the time, Emily had smiled. By late afternoon, the house was quiet again. The children napped. Emily folded laundry slowly, her back aching. She paused when she heard Daniel's car return earlier than usual. His steps were heavy, impatient. "You forgot to tell me about a call," he snapped as he entered. "My manager said you showed up at the office last week. That's embarrassing." "I brought your documents," Emily said. "You asked me to. I didn't ask you to hover." Daniel cut in. "You need to remember your place." The word place stayed with her long after he walked away. That evening, as Emily sorted the mail, she noticed an envelope unlike the others. Thick, official. Her name printed cleanly on the front. The return address was the law firm that had handled her father's estate. A single line was stamped across the top. "Estate finalization confirmed." Her breath caught. The house felt suddenly too quiet. Emily sat down slowly, the envelope resting unopened in her hands. She didn't tear it. She didn't react. She simply stared at it, listening to the faint sound of Daniel talking on the phone in the other room, his voice low, unfamiliar, almost pleased. Emily placed the envelope carefully into her bag, next to her wallet. She didn't know yet who else would soon step into her life, but something had already begun to shift. Emily Carter's heart was already racing before she stepped through the glass doors of Daniel's office building. Not from fear, she wasn't the kind of woman who startled easily, but from instinct. The kind that tightened the chest before the mind could explain why. She held a thin folder against her side. Contracts Daniel had rushed out of the house without. He'd snapped at her that morning, blaming her for his mistake. "Just bring them. Don't make this harder than it has to be," he'd said, like asking his heavily pregnant wife to cross town in traffic was an inconvenience for him. The office floor was busy. Phones rang. People moved with purpose. Emily checked in with reception like she'd been asked. They waved her through without offering to call Daniel first, which struck her as odd. This used to be the kind of place where everyone knew she was Daniel's wife. Now a few coworkers glanced up and then quickly looked away. She told herself it meant nothing. Then she saw Daniel's office. The door was open, and someone else was already inside. Vanessa Reed sat at Daniel's desk as if it belonged to her, not perched on the edge, not waiting politely. She sat fully in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, heels resting against the wood as though she'd been there 1,000 times. Her dress was fitted, professional enough for HR, personal enough to feel wrong. Her posture wasn't that of an assistant, it was that of an equal. Emily stopped walking. Vanessa looked up slowly. Their eyes met, and instead of surprise, there was recognition, calculation. A smile curved her lips, slow and deliberate. "Oh," Vanessa said lightly, standing at her own pace. "You must be the wife." The word wife landed like a label, not a title. Emily's mouth went dry. "I'm Emily," she said, steady, despite the weight pressing against her chest. "Daniel asked me to bring these." She held out the folder. Daniel stepped forward, barely glancing at her. He took the documents without thanks. "You could have left them at reception," he said. No need to interrupt. Vanessa's smile widened just a little. Emily waited for Daniel to say her name, to introduce her properly, to shift the moment back to something familiar. He didn't. He stood beside Vanessa instead, close enough that their arms brushed. The office seemed to slow around them. A few co-workers watched from behind their screens, curiosity thinly disguised as work. Vanessa reached out and touched Daniel's arm casually, her fingers lingering too long. Daniel didn't pull away. Emily noticed the small plastic card hanging from Vanessa's lanyard, a key card, the same color as Daniel's. Not the lighter color worn by junior staff. Her stomach tightened. "I didn't realize you had help," Emily said carefully. Vanessa laughed softly. "Oh, I do more than help." She tilted her head toward Daniel. "We're a team." Daniel nodded once. Vanessa's been invaluable. She understands the business. The business. As if Emily hadn't spent years managing his schedule, his contacts, his deadlines from home. As if the unpaid work didn't count because it wasn't logged in his company system. Emily glanced around. No one met her eyes. She felt it then, the shift. Not sudden, not loud. Just the quiet realization that she was no longer the center of Daniel's world. She was an inconvenience, an afterthought he hadn't bothered to hide. "I'll go," Emily said. Daniel didn't stop her. As she turned, Vanessa's voice followed her, low enough to feel private, loud enough to cut. "Must be hard," she said, being replaced without noticing. Emily kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. She passed desks where people whispered behind their screens. She reached the elevator and waited, her reflection staring back at her from the metal doors, pregnant, pale, eyes too sharp for someone who'd just been dismissed. The doors closed. The ride down was silent. At home, Emily sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone outside to play. She replayed the scene again and again, the way Vanessa sat, the way Daniel stood, the way no one spoke up. She thought of the envelope still unopened in her bag. She didn't reach for it. That night, Daniel came home late. He barely looked at her as he dropped his keys on the counter. "You embarrassed me today," he said flatly. "Showing up like that. You don't belong at the office anymore." Emily swallowed. "I brought what you asked for." "That's not the point," he snapped. "You don't belong in my world anymore." The words were calm, measured, more dangerous than shouting. Emily nodded slowly, absorbing them. As she turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom, she heard Daniel's phone buzz. He smiled at the screen in a way she hadn't seen in months. From the hallway, unseen, Emily heard Vanessa's voice through the speaker, laughing softly, confident. "She won't last," Vanessa whispered. Emily stopped walking. She placed one hand on her stomach, the other against the wall to steady herself. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened mirror, silent, observant, unchanged on the surface. Something inside her shifted again. And this time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like preparation. The front door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. Emily froze in the kitchen, one hand gripping the edge of the counter, the other resting protectively on her stomach. The children went silent in the living room, their laughter cutting off mid-sound. Before Emily could move, the sharp click of heels echoed down the hallway. Margaret Carter had arrived. Margaret was Daniel's mother, a woman in her early 60s, with a stiff posture and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't knock. She never did. She treated the house the way she treated Emily, as something temporary, something she had permission to rearrange. Behind her, Daniel followed, his expression tight, and behind him, quiet, deliberate, was Vanessa. Vanessa didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She walked in like a guest who expected to stay. Margaret scanned the room slowly, her gaze dragging over the furniture, the children's backpacks by the door, the faint smell of lunch still in the air, her mouth twisted with disapproval. "This place feels chaotic," Margaret said. "No structure," Emily swallowed. "The kids just got home from school." "That's no excuse," Margaret replied sharply. "Children should be seen, not heard." One of the children shifted closer to Emily, sensing the tension. Emily placed a hand on the child's shoulder, grounding herself. Margaret's eyes flicked to Emily's stomach. "And you," she added, lowering her voice in a way that felt more cruel than shouting. "You've put on far too much weight. It's not healthy. Daniel needs a woman who represents him properly." Emily's face burned. "I'm pregnant." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Women work through worse. In my day, we didn't make excuses." Vanessa had already taken a seat on the couch. She crossed her legs, posture relaxed, eyes moving slowly around the room like she was memorizing it. Her purse rested beside her, as if she might leave or might not. Margaret walked closer, her voice tightening. "You know, Daniel's success didn't come from this," she said, gesturing around the house. "It came from ambition, from discipline." She turned to Daniel, and instead of elevating him, she's managed him, like a secretary. Daniel didn't hesitate. "She's been coasting for years, Mom." The words struck harder than any insult Margaret could have delivered. Emily stared at him. "Coasting?" she repeated quietly. "I raised your children. I stepped back from my career. I managed everything so you could—" "Exactly," Daniel cut in. "You managed. You didn't contribute." The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to press inward. Margaret moved through the living room, picking things up, inspecting them, setting them down in new places. She paused at the shelf where family photos were displayed, birthday smiles, school milestones, quiet moments captured in frames. Without comment, she lifted one photo, then another. She stacked them carefully, face down, on the coffee table. Emily noticed. Her chest tightened, but she didn't stop her. Her children were watching. Vanessa watched the gesture closely. A faint smile tugged at her lips before she smoothed it away. "This house needs refinement," Margaret said. "Order," Daniel nodded. "I agree." Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear, awareness. The children stood frozen, watching the adults move around them like pieces on a board. Emily ushered them gently toward their room. "Go play," she whispered. "I'll come check on you." They hesitated, then obeyed. When the door closed behind them, Margaret's tone shifted. Lower, sharper. "You've made yourself invisible," she told Emily. "That's what happens when you forget your place." Emily's voice barely rose above a whisper. "This is my home," Margaret laughed softly. "Is it?" Vanessa finally spoke, her tone light. "Change is uncomfortable," she said. "But sometimes necessary." Emily turned to Daniel. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The silence stretched. Margaret gathered her coat. "Think about what's best for Daniel," she said as she moved toward the door. "For the family." Vanessa stood as well, adjusting her purse, giving Emily a look that felt like a warning. Daniel remained behind. When the door closed, the house felt hollow. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "We need to talk tonight," he said. Emily looked up at him. "When the kids are asleep." The words weren't a request. As Daniel walked away, Emily's gaze drifted back to the coffee table, to the stack of photographs, faces hidden, moments erased. She felt the weight of the unborn child shift inside her. And for the first time, she wondered what Daniel planned to take next. The announcement came without warning. It was already dark outside, the hallway lit by warm lamps. When Emily was halfway down the hallway, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other holding her youngest child's small fingers, and Daniel's voice cut through the house, cold, loud, final. "This ends tonight." She stopped. The children froze too, sensing the shift before they understood the words. Emily turned slowly. Daniel stood in the living room with Margaret beside him, her arms crossed in satisfaction. Vanessa stood near the doorway, perfectly still, her lips curved in a smile she didn't try to hide. Emily's heart began to pound. What ends? She asked, though something inside her already knew. Daniel didn't soften his tone. This arrangement, he said. You living here. It's not healthy. Not for me. Not for everyone. Emily's stomach tightened. One child pressed closer to her leg. Another whispered, Mom? Margaret nodded as if approving a business decision. It's for the best, she said. Dragging this out would only make things worse. Vanessa's eyes flicked briefly to the children, then back to Emily. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Emily swallowed. Daniel, I'm pregnant, she said quietly. The kids. I've thought about that, Daniel interrupted, and I've made arrangements. The word arrangements echoed in her ears. Two men stepped into view from the front door. They wore dark jackets with a discreet security company logo on the chest. Not police. Not movers. Private security, the same firm Daniel's company used for events. Emily's breath caught. Why are they here? Daniel's jaw tightened. To make sure this goes smoothly. Nobody wants a scene. Vanessa shifted slightly, as if enjoying the moment. Margaret leaned closer to Daniel, her voice low but sharp. Don't let her guilt you. You've made your decision. Emily felt dizzy. Guilt? She repeated. I'm your wife. Daniel looked at her then. Truly looked, and there was nothing familiar in his eyes. You're someone who's been holding me back, he said. You have no claim here. This isn't your house. I pay for everything. The words hit like a physical blow. Emily stared at him. That's not true, Daniel scoffed. You don't own anything. You've never contributed financially. Everything here exists because of me. Vanessa let out a soft laugh, barely audible. Margaret smiled. One of the security men stepped forward, careful but firm. Ma'am, Mr. Carter has asked that you leave tonight. We're just here to supervise while you pack some essentials. Emily's ears rang. The room seemed to tilt. She looked at the children. Their faces were pale, confused, frightened. One of them began to cry. Please, Emily said, her voice shaking for the first time. They're children. Let them sleep here tonight. I can go stay with a friend. Come back tomorrow for their things. Daniel shook his head. You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you won't leave, I'll have to call the police and tell them you're unstable. Is that what you want the kids to see? Margaret added. Dragging them into your drama is cruel. Cruel. The words settled deep inside Emily's chest. The security men waited, professional, distant. One of them held the door open. They weren't dragging her out, they didn't have that legal right, but they were there to make it clear she had no power here tonight. Emily bent slowly, pain shooting through her back, and lifted a bag she'd packed earlier for the hospital just in case. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she reached for her purse, Daniel stepped back, increasing the distance between them. Vanessa moved closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Emily noticed. She tried to call a ride, her fingers trembling as she opened the app. The screen flashed, then stopped. Payment declined, her throat closed. Daniel watched without expression. I moved the money this afternoon, he said. You'll figure it out, you always do. The children clung to her now, crying openly. Emily wrapped her arms around them, fighting to stay upright. The security men walked with them toward the door. Not roughly, not kindly, just efficiently, making sure she kept moving. At the threshold, Emily paused. She turned back once, taking in the living room, the couch where her children learned to read, the shelf now empty of photos, the place she had kept running quietly for years. Daniel stood tall, Vanessa beside him, Margaret just behind, a united front. Take whatever you can carry, Daniel said. The rest, we'll figure out with the lawyers. The door closed with a final heavy click. The lock slid into place. Emily stood on the porch, the night air cold against her skin. The children huddled close. Her body ached. Her heart felt hollow. She didn't cry. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stepped outside, robe pulled tight. Emily? She called softly. Are you all right? Emily swallowed. I need a phone, she said. Mrs. Jenkins hurried over, ushering them toward her warm, cluttered living room. She pressed a phone into Emily's hand without questions. Emily dialed the only person she trusted to think clearly right now. Sarah? She whispered when the call connected. It's me. I need help. I'm on my way, Sarah said. No hesitation. Back on the porch of the house she'd just left, the lights glowed warmly through the curtains. Inside, Daniel turned away, already moving on. Outside, in a stranger's borrowed light, Emily took a slow breath. Somewhere deep in her bag, unopened, lay an envelope that knew the truth. And soon, so would everyone else. Emily's hands were still shaking when the door finally closed behind her. This time, it wasn't Daniel's door. It was Sarah Whitman's. Sarah, early 30s, sharp-eyed, calm, had been Emily's college roommate years ago. Back then, Emily had dreamed of finishing law school. Sarah actually had. Now she was a family lawyer with a small but respected practice in the city. When Emily had called from the neighbor's house, Sarah hadn't asked for details. She'd simply said, "Stay put, I'm coming," and arrived 20 minutes later with an empty SUV and 2 spare car seats in the back. Now, Sarah took one look at Emily standing in her hallway coat half off, children clinging to her legs, pregnancy obvious under her dress, and said nothing. She simply ushered them inside. The door locked. Only then did Emily's legs give out. Sarah guided her to the couch while the children curled up nearby, exhausted. A blanket appeared over their shoulders. Water was placed in Emily's hands. "You don't have to explain right now," Sarah said gently. "Just breathe." Emily nodded. She stared straight ahead, her mind replaying the sound of the lock sliding into place behind her. The way Daniel hadn't looked back. The way Vanessa had smiled. The threat of the police. Hours passed quietly. The children fell asleep one by one. Sarah's spare bedroom filled with borrowed pillows and makeshift beds. The house settled. Only when the room was silent did Emily reach into her bag. Her fingers brushed the thick envelope she had ignored for days. Estate finalization confirmed. She stared at it for a long moment, then finally opened it. The papers inside were crisp, formal, precise. Her father's trust, fully executed. A cover letter from the firm explained in plain language what the legal jargon outlined. The last of the estate had cleared probate. Assets were now fully under the control of the trust set up in her name years earlier. The total value sat just over $10 billion on paper, a number so large it felt like fiction. Asset summaries followed. Companies, holdings, accounts. The numbers were so large they didn't feel real. But one section made her breath stop. Primary residential property, 14 Willow Lane legal title holder, Emily Carter character. Separate property acquired with trust funds, protected by prenuptial agreement, executed pre-marriage. The house, their house, not Daniel's. Never Daniel's. Emily lowered the papers into her lap. She didn't laugh, she didn't cry. Her face didn't change at all. Sarah watched her carefully. "Emily," she said slowly, "do you understand what this means?" Emily nodded once. "I do. You own that house," Sarah continued. "Legally, and the trust documents plus the prenup your father made you sign. That's very strong. Daniel throwing you out like that was an illegal self-help eviction at best." "Yes. And he doesn't know?" Sarah asked. Emily folded the papers neatly. "I told him years ago my father had some investments. He laughed it off, said he was the real provider. I stopped talking about it." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Emily spoke again. "I don't want him warned." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We could call the police tonight, show them the deed, force him to let you back in, or get an emergency court order. You're pregnant. You have the kids." Emily shook her head. "He'd spin it. Say I'm unstable. Say I broke in. He's already telling people a story." Sarah hesitated. "You're not wrong. I want him comfortable," Emily said quietly. "I want him thinking he won. I want the record to be clear when we go to court." She met Sarah's eyes then. There was no panic there, only clarity. "I need proof," Emily said. "Everything. And I need him to think I have nothing." Sarah leaned back slowly, understanding dawning. "You want to document the affair? And the eviction?" Emily added. "And any money he moved, and every lie." Sarah nodded once. "Then we do this properly." The next morning, after making breakfast for the kids and setting them up with cartoons in the next room, Sarah made a call. By afternoon, a man arrived at the house. He was middle-aged, plainly dressed, and carried himself with professional calm. "This is Mark Reynolds," Sarah said, "private investigator, former financial crimes unit. He works with my firm on complicated cases." Mark shook Emily's hand respectfully. I'm sorry for what you're going through, Mrs. Carter. Emily didn't respond to the sympathy. I need facts, she said. Not comfort, Mark nodded. Then we'll start with timelines, he said. When things changed. What accounts you had access to before and after? Any threats? Any witnesses? He laid out his plan carefully, how he would pull public records on the house and any loans, monitor Daniel's visible financial activity, talk to willing co-workers, document the relationship with Vanessa, save social media posts before they could be deleted. Anything that could be obtained legally without tipping Daniel off. Some internal company records will have to wait until Sarah files, he added, but we can start building a file now. Emily listened closely. She asked precise questions. She took notes on a yellow legal pad Sarah had left on the table. Where will we stay? She asked softly when Mark finished. With me for a few days, Sarah said immediately. Then, once your trust lawyer wires initial funds to a new account he can't touch, we get you a rental close to the kids' school. I'll help file for temporary orders. Emily nodded. That evening, while the children played quietly in the next room, Emily watched the city lights flick on outside through the window. Somewhere not far away, Daniel was probably sitting comfortably on her couch, believing he had won. She didn't feel angry anymore. She felt focused. Mark left with a folder full of notes and a list of tasks. Sarah started drafting the first set of legal documents. In a few days, there would be pictures, emails, financial records. A complete story built on facts, not rumors. For now, Emily sat with the trust papers spread out before her. Her father's handwriting in the margins of an old memo stared back at her, a note he'd once scribbled during their first meeting. When people show you who they are, let the paperwork answer for you. Emily slid the documents into the fireproof pouch she'd carried for years. Daniel thought he had erased her. He had no idea he had just exposed himself. The first folder hit the table with a soft thud that felt louder than it was. Not because Emily was afraid, but because the sound felt like the start of something she couldn't undo. Mark Reynolds, the private investigator Sarah had hired, spread the papers out one by one across the dining table in Sarah's small but orderly dining room. His movements were careful, deliberate, like a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. Sarah stood beside him, arms folded, her face tight with focus. Emily sat opposite them. One hand rested on her pregnant belly, the other lay flat on the table, steady now. Her children were in the next room, quiet, watching a cartoon with the volume low. Their muffled laughter felt far away. Mark cleared his throat. What I have so far is preliminary, he said, but it's documented, corroborated, and enough to guide what Sarah files next. Nothing here is guesswork. He slid the first printout forward. Credit card statements. Transaction histories from a joint account Emily had once had partial online access to before Daniel quietly removed her. The trust's lawyers had helped her request copies through the bank. Regular hotel charges, Mark said, tapping highlighted lines. Weekdays. Lunchtime, same location. Matches days when your husband told you he was working late or in meetings. Emily's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Next came a series of screenshots. Vanessa's public social media posts. Photos cropped to be safe, but not careful enough. A reflection in a window showing Daniel's profile. A familiar watch on a man's wrist at the edge of a frame. A blurred office badge in the corner that matched Daniel's company colors. I can't access their private messages without a court order, Mark said. But they haven't been as subtle as they think in public. Several co-workers liked or commented on these. If needed, they can testify to what everyone already knew. Emily stared at the images, then at the dates and times printed at the bottom. They lined up neatly with the days Daniel had snapped at her for bothering him or showing up unannounced. Mark laid out a typed summary next. Witness statements, he explained. One from a receptionist at his office, one from a junior analyst. Both describe Vanessa introducing herself as basically family to Daniel. Both say you were talked about in unkind terms. Emily's eyes flicked to Sarah. We'll sanitize the language for court, Sarah said. But the fact that they're willing to go on record is huge. Next came the financial records. Mark tapped a highlighted section. Your husband attempted to refinance the house 3 days after he had you removed, he said. He told the bank you were moving out permanently and that he had sole authority. That refinancing attempt was flagged because the title search came back with your trust name and separate property designation. Emily let out a slow breath through her nose. He didn't get that far, Mark continued. The bank froze the process pending clarification. We've already sent a preservation letter so they don't lose anything. Sarah nodded. We'll subpoena the full file. But this alone shows intent. He was trying to borrow against property that legally isn't his. Mark pulled out one more page. This is from the security firm he hired the night he forced you out, he said. They keep basic visit logs for liability reasons, address, time, who made the booking, and why. He slid it forward. Client, Daniel Carter. Service standby presence during domestic separation. Notes. Wife to be escorted off premises at client's request. The words were neat, clinical, ugly. Emily stared at them until the letters blurred. Sarah spoke quietly. We also have Mrs. Jenkins' statement, the neighbor who saw you on the porch with the kids and let you use her phone. She wrote everything down while it was fresh. That's powerful. Mark hesitated. There is something else you need to know. Emily looked up. Vanessa has been talking, he said. Not just in the office, mutual acquaintances. She's been telling people you abandoned the kids, that you walked out on them, and Daniel had to step up to protect them. Emily's chest tightened. She's framing you as unstable, Sarah said, so that if this ever hit court, people would already have a narrative in their heads. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The porch. The crying children. Vanessa's small, satisfied smile. When she opened her eyes again, they were clear. Can you prove she said that? Emily asked Mark. Yes, he replied. One of Daniel's co-workers recorded a conversation on their phone after she kept repeating it in the break room. They were uncomfortable with it and came to me after your neighbor confirmed the eviction. Good, Emily said quietly. Keep that safe, Mark nodded. Next steps. I keep documenting. Sarah files for emergency orders, custody, support, and for you to have exclusive use of the house. Once the court signs off, we can get formal subpoenas for more detailed records. That's when we'll get internal emails, building security footage, things I can't legally touch yet. Emily absorbed it all. So this isn't everything, she said, just the first layer. Exactly, Mark replied. But it's enough to go to court without looking like this is just, he said, she said. Sarah placed a hand over Emily's. If we move now, Sarah said, we control the narrative with facts. His affair, the illegal self-help eviction, the attempted refinance on your separate property, and the smear campaign. A judge will take that very seriously. Emily nodded slowly. File it, she said. All of it. Mark began collecting the papers into neat stacks. I'll focus on the company side as well, he said. Affairs with subordinates and financial misconduct don't play well with corporate policy, especially if it becomes public record. That's not revenge, Emily said, more to herself than to them. That's just consequences finally catching up. Sarah exchanged a glance with Mark. That night, after the children were asleep in Sarah's spare rooms, Emily sat alone with a copy of the refinancing attempt and the trust deed in front of her. Proof of betrayal. Proof of cruelty. Proof that her silence had never meant weakness, it had meant patience. She slid the pages into the fireproof pouch she'd carried for years. Somewhere else, Vanessa was telling lies. Soon, she wouldn't be the only one people were listening to. The room erupted in applause before the words had fully landed. Vanessa Reed stood at the center of the corporate celebration, one manicured hand wrapped around a champagne glass, the other looped possessively through Daniel Carter's arm. The lights were warm, flattering. Music hummed softly in the background. Laughter bounced easily from group to group. It was the kind of event meant to signal success, a major contract closed, a good quarter, an excuse for executives to congratulate themselves. Vanessa thrived in it. She leaned into Daniel, her body angled just enough to make the message clear to anyone watching. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was possession. Daniel smiled, proud and relaxed in a way he hadn't been in months. His suit was new. The watch on his wrist gleamed. Margaret stood nearby as his invited family guest, nodding along with a group of corporate allies, board members, senior managers, people who mattered in Daniel's world. No one asked about his wife. Most had already heard Vanessa's version of that story. Across the room, near a column partially hidden by a decorative plant, Mark Reynolds stood in a plain blazer, a drink in his hand he barely touched. He was a consultant friend of one of the suppliers, according to the guest list. He blended into the background easily. His phone was set to record, screen off, capturing audio and occasional video snippets whenever Vanessa laughed too loudly. Vanessa lifted her glass. "May I?" she said lightly, her voice cutting through the noise. The room quieted. Phones came out almost immediately. Some people like documenting everything. Some, Mark knew, enjoyed having evidence in case allegiances needed to shift later. Vanessa smiled wider, enjoying the attention. "I just want to say how refreshing it is," she began, "to step into a future that finally makes sense." She paused, letting the words sink in. "To new beginnings," she continued, lifting her glass higher, "and to having the courage to leave dead weight behind." Laughter rippled through the room. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Daniel chuckled beside her, squeezing her hand. Margaret raised her glass in approval. Vanessa took a slow sip, eyes shining. In one corner, a junior employee winced and looked away. Mark noticed. The night rolled on. More drinks, more photos. Vanessa moved through the crowd like she owned the air around her, touching arms, leaning in close, making jokes about people who can't keep up with ambition. "I mean," she said to a small circle, "some people marry success and then just sit on the couch. You can't drag that kind of energy forever." A few nervous laughs, a few uncomfortable looks. Mark's phone captured every word. About an hour into the event, while Vanessa was returning to her seat, a man in a dark suit approached the entrance. He spoke briefly with reception, showed identification, and pointed toward Vanessa. The receptionist glanced around the room and flagged down a staff member, a young server carrying an empty tray. "Can you take this to Miss Reed?" the receptionist asked, handing over a plain envelope. "The gentleman at the front says it's a legal document that must be handed to her personally. He's waiting to see it done." The server nodded, a little nervous but willing. Vanessa was checking her reflection in her phone when the server reached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the server said. "Someone at the front asked me to give this to you." She handed Vanessa the envelope. Vanessa frowned slightly. "From who?" The server glanced back at reception. "He said he was a process server, from the court." A few people nearby looked up at the word court. Vanessa's pulse jumped. She forced a smile. "Thank you," she said briskly, trying to sound unconcerned. She opened the envelope, expecting maybe something about a parking ticket, some bureaucratic mix-up. Her smile vanished. Inside was a single document, heavy paper, official seals, sub poena to appear and produce documents. Her name, Daniel's name. Case caption: Emily Carter versus Daniel Carter. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Her eyes scanned lines she barely processed. Hearing date, requirements to bring her communications, instructions not to delete anything. The room seemed to tilt. "Vanessa?" Daniel asked, noticing her sudden stillness. She didn't answer. The laughter around her faded into a dull hum. Her pulse roared in her ears. She felt suddenly exposed, like every eye in the room could see straight through her. "What is it?" Daniel pressed, lowering his voice. Vanessa folded the paper quickly, too quickly. "Nothing," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Just some legal thing. Probably about work." But her hand trembled. Over by the column, Mark stopped the recording and made a quiet note to himself. "Subpoena served, in public, in front of coworkers, right after that toast." Context mattered. Vanessa slipped the subpoena into her purse, trying to act as if everything was normal. Suddenly the room felt different, too bright, too loud, too full of people who might have seen, might be guessing. Her earlier words echoed in her head. Dead weight, courage to leave. You can't drag that kind of energy forever. Now, someone else was dragging her into a room where those words would not sound clever. For the first time, Vanessa wondered who else had been watching all along and how much of her performance had already been recorded. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy echo, and Daniel Carter walked in like a man who believed the outcome was already decided. He wore a dark suit, crisp and expensive. His posture was relaxed. Vanessa was beside him, fingers wrapped tightly around his hand, her chin lifted with forced confidence. Margaret followed a step behind, her expression sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. To anyone watching, they looked united, prepared, certain. This wasn't the final divorce hearing, it was the first major one on Emily's emergency motion for temporary orders, custody, support, and exclusive use of the house. But for Daniel, this was the real battle. He scanned the room briefly, then smirked when he didn't see Emily yet. "She won't show," he murmured to Vanessa. "She never does when things get serious. She can't handle pressure." Vanessa nodded, though her hand tightened around her purse. She'd spent the week combing through her messages, rereading conversations with Daniel and Margaret, knowing some of them would now belong to a court file. Then the room shifted. A quiet ripple moved through the public benches as Emily entered. She walked in alone, except for Sarah at her side. No dramatics, no rush. She wore a simple, neutral dress, flat shoes, her hair pulled back neatly. One hand rested naturally on her pregnant belly. In the other, she carried a single plain folder and the familiar fireproof pouch. Her face was calm, not cold, not emotional. Steady. Daniel's smirk faded. Emily took her seat at the petitioner's table beside Sarah. Sarah leaned in and whispered something. Emily nodded once. The judge entered. Everyone stood. When the formalities ended, Daniel's lawyer spoke first, confident, rehearsed. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a difficult time for my client. He's a devoted father trying to navigate a separation from a spouse who has unfortunately become unstable." He used words like emotional, overwhelmed, and irrational. He described the night of the eviction as Daniel removing the children from a volatile situation and temporarily asking his wife to leave until she could calm down. He painted Vanessa as a preside colleague unfairly dragged into a domestic dispute, Margaret as a concerned mother. He framed everything as a misunderstanding. A woman overreacting and weaponizing legal tools after a breakup. Emily sat still. She let every word land. Sarah took notes without interrupting. When he finished, the judge glanced at Sarah. "Miss Whitman?" the judge asked. Sarah stood. She didn't argue emotion. She didn't try to out-drama Daniel's attorney. She spoke plainly. "Your Honor, my client would like to address the court briefly before we review the documents," she said. A murmur moved through the room. The judge considered Emily for a moment, then nodded. "Go ahead, Mrs. Carter. Keep it concise." Emily rose. Her heart beat steadily. Her voice did not shake. "I was silent that night," she said, "because I had 3 terrified children and a body that is already under strain from pregnancy. My husband told me he would call the police and claim I was unstable if I didn't leave quietly. I chose not to traumatize my children further on the front lawn." Daniel exhaled loudly, scoffing. Emily continued. "I didn't argue when he insulted me. I didn't fight when he moved money and cut off my cards. I didn't respond when people I once considered acquaintances repeated lies that I abandoned my kids." She paused, letting the words settle. "I waited," she said, "because I knew I had something stronger than an argument. I had paperwork." She opened the folder and passed it to Sarah. Sarah stepped forward and handed the first document to the clerk. "The original property deed, Your Honor," Sarah said. "Sole ownership in my client's name, recorded at purchase. Down payment came from a pre-existing trust. We've included that documentation as well, along with the prenuptial addendum executed before this marriage began." The clerk passed the documents to the judge. Daniel leaned forward slightly, frowning. Emily spoke again, calmly. "The house my husband claimed I had no right to is separate property. It never belonged to him under the law." Sarah submitted the next documents. "Trust agreements," she said. "Dated and executed years prior. You'll see that the trust not Mr. Carter provided the funds for the home, and that any property purchased with those funds would remain Mrs. Carter's separate property." The judge read carefully, slowly. He turned a page, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "And finally," Sarah added, "evidence of attempted fraud." She handed over the refinancing paperwork from the bank, the notes indicating Daniel had claimed sole authority. The date just days after the night he ordered Emily out. The courtroom was quiet now. Even the shuffling of papers had stopped. Daniel's face drained of color. "That's not," he started. The judge raised a hand. "You'll speak through your attorney, Mr. Carter." He looked back at the documents. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, voice even but firm. "Based on what I'm seeing here, you never owned this property. You attempted to refinance a house legally titled as your wife's separate property under a trust and prenuptial agreement executed before your marriage. The words landed like a verdict already sealed. Vanessa's breath caught. Her hand slipped from Daniel's. Margaret stiffened. That can't be right, she snapped. My son. The judge gave her a look that made her fall silent. Sarah spoke again. We've also submitted a sworn statement from Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who witnessed Mr. Carter ordering my client and 3 young children off the property late at night with private security present, as well as logs from the security firm describing the domestic separation and intent to escort the wife off the premises. The judge flipped through those pages next. And, Sarah added, a preliminary report from a licensed private investigator summarizing financial activity, including hotel charges with dates overlapping Mr. Carter's claimed work hours in a smear campaign in which a third party, her eyes flicked briefly to Vanessa, began telling people my client had abandoned her children. We'll bring more detailed evidence at trial, but for today, we believe this meets the standard for temporary relief. The judge looked up. Mr. Carter, he said, do you dispute that you hired security to remove your pregnant wife and children from a home that she legally owns? Daniel's lawyer started to speak. Your Honor, the situation. It's a yes or no question, the judge said. Daniel swallowed. I asked them to be present, he said. For safety. Whose safety? The judge asked. Silence. The judge set the papers down. Here is what this court is going to do, he said. Effective immediately, Mrs. Carter is granted exclusive use and possession of the marital residence. Mr. Pline. Carter is ordered to vacate the property if he has not already done so and is prohibited from interfering with her occupancy. Temporary full physical custody is granted to Mrs. Carter, with reasonable supervised visitation for Mr. Carter, details to be worked out in a schedule. He paused. Additionally, the refinancing attempt and the financial records raise serious concerns, he added. This court will be referring those matters for further review to the appropriate authorities. I am also ordering both parties to preserve all electronic communications, including those with third parties such as Miss Reed and Mrs. Carter's mother-in-law. His gaze shifted slightly to Vanessa. And Miss Reed, he said, I would strongly advise you to obtain your own counsel regarding your involvement and the subpoena you were served. Vanessa's face went pale. The courtroom buzzed with restrained shock. Emily sat back down slowly, her part finished. She didn't look at Daniel again, but she felt the balance of power settle fully into place. This time, the clique of authority was on her side, and there was no undoing it. The fall didn't happen all at once. It started with small cracks Daniel tried to ignore. He didn't even make it out of the courthouse parking lot before his phone began to vibrate nonstop. Calls, emails, notifications multiplying so fast the screen blurred. The company's HR department, his direct supervisor, a board liaison. He let them go to voicemail at first, still reeling, still convinced some appeal or technicality would fix things. Vanessa wasn't so calm. She sat beside him in the car, staring straight ahead, her hands clenched together. The judge's words replayed in her mind, you may want your own counsel. The subpoena. The mention of smear campaigns and preserved messages. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just gossip anymore. It was record. Over the next few days, the consequences picked up speed. An internal review was announced. Quietly at first, in a short email about compliance with company ethics policies. Then, less quietly, when Daniel's keycard stopped working one morning, and security asked him to wait in the lobby while his supervisor sorted things out. By the end of that week, Daniel was placed on administrative leave. Until we conclude our investigation, they said. The investigation now included his relationship with Vanessa, a direct report, potential misuse of company resources, reputational risk from a court case involving alleged financial misrepresentation. Vanessa was called into HR separately. She left that meeting pale, her usual bright confidence stripped away. Co-workers stopped gossiping with her at lunch. Some wouldn't meet her eyes. Screenshots of her dead-weight speech from the party had circulated. Mark's recordings had done their work. Daniel tried to call her that night. She didn't answer. 2 days later, she quietly filed an internal transfer request to a European branch office. The company approved it swiftly. It was easier to move a problem far away than to defend keeping her. Daniel's mother fell slower but harder. At first, Margaret dismissed the hearing as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But then people in her social circle started to pull back. She noticed lunches being rescheduled, messages left unread. Someone had leaked the portions of her text messages that had come up in discovery, the ones where she told Daniel to break Emily so she wouldn't fight back, the ones where she called Emily weak and dead weight, the ones where she agreed that the eviction should happen before she changes her mind. Margaret went to the grocery store one afternoon and felt eyes following her down the aisle. She heard the words, "That's her," whispered by the dairy case and pretended not to. Shame was a slower burn, but it burned deeply. One evening, a few weeks after the hearing, Margaret knocked on the door of 14 Willow Lane. Daniel was with her. They stood on the porch together, smaller than Emily remembered them. Daniel's shoulders slumped. His suit was wrinkled. There were dark shadows under his eyes. Emily hesitated, then opened the door halfway. Daniel dropped to his knees. The sound of his weight hitting the porch boards was sharp. The same boards she had stood on, shaking, with 3 children clinging to her in the cold. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the house was in your name like that. I thought I had time to fix everything." Emily looked down at him. She felt the memory of the night he'd stood in this same doorway, eyes hard, voice cold. Margaret's anger had cracked into panic. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice trembling. "He lost his position. People are talking about charges. Emily, please, you've made your point. Our family," Margaret added desperately. "Think of the family." "Our family," Emily repeated quietly. "You mean the one you helped throw out into the street?" Margaret flinched. Daniel crawled forward slightly, hands outstretched. "I was angry. I was stupid," he said. "Vanessa, she pushed me. She said you were dragging me down." You meant every word you said," Emily replied, calm. "You told me I didn't own anything. You told me I had no claim to the house my father paid for. You threatened to call the police if I didn't leave quietly. You made our children watch." Daniel's voice dropped to a rough whisper. "Please, I'll do anything. Just don't take the kids away from me." Emily's gaze hardened. "They're not being taken away from you," she said. "You walked away from them when you chose your pride and your affair over their mother's safety." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Emily, the community?" Emily's jaw tightened. "The community finally knows the truth," she said. "Not the story you and Vanessa spread." Silence swallowed the porch. Inside the house, a child's laughter floated faintly down the hallway. Emily glanced back for a second, then turned to face them fully. "This house is stable now," she said. "The children are safe. The court has given us a structure. If you want to see them, you can follow the schedule and the rules. No more surprises. No more showing up at my door." Daniel's shoulders shook. "I never thought you'd be this cold," he whispered. Emily considered that. "I'm not cold," she said. "I'm finished." She stepped back and gently closed the door. Inside, she leaned against it for a moment, not weak, not shaken, just still. Daniel and Margaret remained on the porch for a long minute, hoping the door might reopen. It didn't. Within the month, Daniel quietly resigned from his job for personal reasons. The internal investigation didn't need to announce findings publicly. The damage was done. Recruiters stopped returning his calls. Old colleagues messaged him with, "Sorry, man," and then went silent. Margaret withdrew from most social events. She told herself it was because people had changed. Deep down, she knew it was because she had been seen. Emily stood in her living room that night, the house quiet, familiar again. Her children slept safely down the hall. On the table lay the stack of divorce papers and final settlement terms Sarah had walked her through. She picked up the pen. Tomorrow, it would be filed. Soon, it would all be finalized. For the first time since the lock had clicked behind her on that cold night, Emily allowed herself one steady breath, knowing the last legal chapter was about to begin. The sound of the judge's stamp came down hard and final. Emily felt it in her chest more than in her ears. "Final decree of divorce is granted," the judge said calmly. "Full physical and legal custody of the minor children is awarded to the mother, with visitation as previously ordered. Property division to follow the terms agreed and entered." This time, Daniel wasn't there. His attorney appeared by video, his camera off, his voice flat. There were no speeches, no last-minute attacks. just a tired acknowledgement that they had no grounds to fight what the paperwork and prior rulings already made clear. Emily sat still, hands folded, listening as if the words needed time to settle into her bones. This hearing had come months after the first one, months of supervised visits, financial disclosures, discovery, and negotiations. In the middle of all of it, Emily had given birth to a healthy baby, her fourth child between court deadlines and school pickups. The newborn slept at home now, surrounded by siblings who had already learned what safety felt like. Months of her rebuilding a life around court dates and school schedules. When it was over, the judge looked up. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you handled a difficult process with dignity. I wish you and your children well." "Thank you, Your Honor," Emily replied. In the hallway outside, Sarah closed the file and smiled. "That's it," Sarah said softly. "You're legally done. He can't touch the house. The trust is intact. Custody is yours. All that's left is living your life." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You were prepared," Sarah added. "That's why this went the way it did." Emily shook her head gently. "I survived," she replied. "The preparation came after the survival." That evening, Emily returned to the house, her house. The key turned easily in the lock. No resistance, no fear, just the soft click of belonging. Inside, the space felt familiar but lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The children ran ahead of her, laughing, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. Their laughter filled rooms that had once held tension and quiet tears. Emily moved slowly through the living room. The coffee table was clear now. On the shelf, a small stack of framed photos still sat where Margaret had turned them face down months before. Emily picked them up, one by one. A birthday cake smeared with frosting, a school play with crooked paper crowns, a family photo taken before everything broke, before Emily knew how fragile the smiles were. She placed each frame back on the shelf, upright. She didn't do it to pretend the past had been perfect. She did it because those moments still belonged to her and her children, not to the people who tried to rewrite them. From the hallway, one of the kids called out, "Mom, come see, we built a fort." Emily smiled. "I'm coming," she called back. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Emily sat alone at the dining table. Her phone buzzed once. Daniel's name appeared on the screen with a long message preview she didn't read. She didn't open it. She turned the phone face down and slid it away. Instead, she walked to the hallway closet, reached behind the winter coats, and pulled out the small fireproof document pouch, the same one Daniel once mocked, the same one that had carried her through lawyers' offices and courtrooms. She opened it, checked the papers, one last time, the trust deed, the house title, the final decree, then closed it carefully and placed it in a higher, less reachable spot. She didn't need to keep it close anymore. The danger had passed. Closure didn't need guarding. Weeks turned into a new rhythm. Emily used a small portion of the trust income, not the core, just the earnings to stabilize their life. A reliable car, activities for the kids, a modest home office. The rest stayed where her father had intended it to be, a safety net, not a trophy. One afternoon, Emily sat under bright studio lights, a microphone clipped neatly to her jacket. Across from her sat a calm, attentive interviewer from a local talk show that had reached out after her court case summary quietly made its way through legal circles. "You went through public humiliation," the interviewer said gently. "Legal battles, betrayal. What would you say to women watching who feel powerless in their own homes?" Emily paused, thoughtful. "I want them to know silence isn't always weakness," she said. "Sometimes it's strategy, sometimes it's survival, and sometimes it's just the moment before you stand up with something stronger than anger facts." The camera stayed on her face as she continued. "You don't owe anyone loud reactions," she said. "You owe yourself protection, truth, and dignity. Get your paperwork, talk to someone who understands the law, and remember that being underestimated is painful, but it can also be your cover while you prepare." The interview aired days later. Messages poured in, women thanking her, men quietly admitting they hadn't understood what financial control looked like. People sharing their own stories of walking away from what was killing them. Emily read them quietly, humbled, replying to a few when she had the emotional space. That night, as she tucked her children into bed, one of them asked, "Mom, are we okay now?" Emily brushed hair from the child's face and smiled. "We are more than okay," she said. "We're safe, and we're free." She turned off the light and closed the door softly. Standing in the hallway, Emily looked around the house one last time, not with pain, not with anger, but with gratitude. She whispered to herself, steady and certain, I didn't take revenge. I took my life back. And somewhere far away, in a smaller apartment, with fewer calls and no cameras, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, finally understanding what his mother had failed to teach him. You don't throw away a woman who knows exactly what's written on the deed. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.